Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining us right now from the 24/7 sports site, hookem.com, it's Jeff Howe. How you doing, Jeff?
Bryan, good to be back on with you. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you. You recovered from National Signing Day?
I got some actual sleep last night, so yeah, I think I'm doing well.
All right, let's take a look at this class. First of all, it's a small class. Does small mean a bad class for Texas?
No, and let me start off by saying, Bryan, there's two things I always look at in recruiting. Is your talent level improving, and did you meet all your needs? So for Texas, is their talent level better than it was yesterday? Yes, I believe so, especially on the offensive line. Did they meet all of their needs in this class? No, I don't think so, especially when you start looking at just the sheer numbers on defense and the fact that there's not a defensive line signing in this class. Is it one of Mack Brown's best classes at the finish line? No. But is it a bad class? By all means, no. I mean, I think you could ask several schools in the region and across the country, would you like to have Kent Perkins or Darius James or Desmond Harrison in your class? And the answer would unequivocally be yes. So there's some quality in this class. Did they miss on some guys? Absolutely. But is it a class that makes this program better? There's no doubt about that in my mind.
All right. Now, this is a topic that's unusual for a Mack Brown coach team because he hasn't had bad recruiting classes over the years, at least when you looked at him on signing day. He always had these top 5 classes. So this is uncharted territory for him right now. The worst class he's had, you think?
Well, it's tough to say that because in hindsight, you got to consider that 2009 class was pretty dismal. Not at the finish line on National Signing Day, but looking back on it now, when you consider that of the 20 signees, you really only got 4 major contributors out of that class.
That
and
hurts.
I believe there were 14 of the 20 signees who were on campus for 2 years or less, and that just kills your depth, and that's a big part of the reason why this program is in the situation that it's been in the last 3 seasons. But at the finish line, yeah, probably. I mean, you'd have to go back to maybe look at that 98 class, and it was part John Makovich's last class and part Mack's first class, so he had to kind of patch some things together. Obviously, he got the 4 kids out of Texas City that year to kind of build momentum going into the 99 class. But, I think so, Bryan, because it's tough for people to get excited about offensive linemen. You can't equate on-field production in terms of a running back with a lot of yards and touchdowns or wide receivers that run, might be 4.40 40 guys or defensive ends that have X amount of sacks and so many varsity seasons. So I think that's kind of the hang-up is, yes, it's a great offensive line class, but for the general public and for fans who follow this program, it's really tough to get excited when you say that the strength of your class is the offensive line.
Of the guys that signed, how many of these kids do you see making an immediate impact?
The 2 right off the bat, and it's kind of cheating to say it, but it's the 2 junior college kids. Desmond Harrison at 24/7 Sports was our top-rated junior college offensive tackle prospect in the country. And Max said yesterday what we've been telling people all along, this guy's going to have a chance to come in and start and be the starting left tackle for this football team. So there's going to be some shifting on the offensive line. Of the 5 guys that returned last year, you've got to think one of those guys is going to be out of the mix. So who is it? So there's going to be some really good competition along the offensive line. And then Jeff Swain, the junior college tight end, is going to come in and kind of be an H-back, fullback type guy, be a guy that's going to be a factor in the run game. Not necessarily a great receiving tight end, but can kind of take the place of a guy like Barrett Matthews as kind of a grunge guy, a blue-collar guy, and do some of the dirty work. I think some of the defensive signees, there's not a lot of numbers there, Bryan, but I think you look at guys like Antoine Davis, the cornerback out of Bastrop, DeAndre Davis, the linebacker out of Houston Cypress Woods, who's rehabbing an ACL injury. You look at a guy like Shavatsky Collins out of Livingston. Those guys have really good size to speed ratios. A guy like Nashawn Hughes, and typically those are guys that are your core special teams guys. And when you look at younger guys in the program this past season, Dalton Santos out of Van, you look at a guy like Tevin Jackson, guys like Josh Turner, Mikael Thompson, who were big special teams contributors early in the year that by the end of the year were either starters or firmly entrenched in the 2 deep. I think you look at some of those guys like Antoine Davis, Shavatsky Collins, DeAndre Davis, that are going to have a chance to contribute early on special teams and then earn their spots on the field.
This Texas team, how much of this has to do? I mean, 9-4 is not a bad year, but how much of this has to do with how well A&M's doing right now?
I think it has a lot to do with it, Brian. I mean, I think that's going to be seen more in the 2014 class. I think Texas is going to be in for a lot of dogfights for recruits in that 2014 class. And you look, there's already been some really good head-to-head battles. Josh Walker out of Gilmer's a kid who was offered by both schools that picked Texas. Nick Harvey's a cornerback, formerly of Lancaster, now Fort Bend Bush in the greater Houston area, offered by both schools, picked Texas A&M, or Josh Walker went to A&M, I should say. I misspoke there. But there's going to be a lot of really good recruiting battles in 2014 because, A&M, you kind of look at when Mack got to Texas during that 98 season, and there's a lot of similarities between Texas then and Texas A&M now. Mack was a new coach on the scene. He kind of reinvented some of the ways recruiting was going about in this state with some of the early recruiting in the junior days and things like that. And you had Ricky Williams winning the Heisman Trophy. All of a sudden, Texas was kind of the cool school to go to. Now, Texas A&M is kind of the cool place to go to. It's kind of the trendy place. Kevin Sumlin has a wide open spread offense. They've shown that they can compete in the best conference in the country, the Southeastern Conference, and then Johnny Manziel winning the Heisman Trophy. I think those things, Texas A&M would never have been in on a kid like Jaquay Williams, the prep school wide receiver they got from Fort Union Military Academy, and guys like Sebastian LaRue out of Santa Monica, California. Texas A&M would never have been on those elite guys nationally had it not been for Johnny Manziel. So there's going to be some battles in state, Brian, but I think what you look at with Texas A&M is they're going to be able to kind of extend their brand nationally and not only really focus on their backyard, but really look throughout the Southeast and into California where they've got some connections and try to get some kids and kind of spread their brand. The tide is stemming, and the tide's changing, and the only thing that's really going to change it is for Texas. I think Texas has to beat Oklahoma and win the Big 12 next year for this thing to not be a full-blown paradigm shift.
When you see this kind of thing going on, then you start wondering if Texas might not be looking at another conference at some point.
It's interesting with conference expansion, Brian. I think the Big 12 has to do something. Whether it's Florida State and Clemson or some combination of Florida State and Georgia Tech, it's coming, and you just hope that the Big 12, doesn't get caught not being able to do anything. The Big 10's doing things. The ACC is doing things. Obviously, we've seen the SEC. They're at 14 teams now, and I think Mike Slive had the quote last spring. He said, I could get to 16 teams in about 5 minutes, which no doubt he could. The Pac-12 has done a really good job in conference expansion, but really extending their brand nationally, and they have more of a national presence now. In the Big 12, honestly, Brian, it has a feel of not where the Southwest Conference was at the end in terms of teams that aren't quality football programs and quality athletic programs, but it really feels like a regional conference. I mean, it doesn't feel like an elite national brand compared to the SEC or the Big Ten or even the Pac-12 now. So I think the end game for Texas is really one of three things down the road, and then we're looking at obviously 20 years possibly down the road with what I'm talking about, but it's either expand the Big 12 and bring in a school like a Florida State, a Clemson, somewhere like that that's going to move the needle, or ultimately I think Texas probably might look at possibly the Big 10, which I think culturally Texas has always felt they probably fit better in the ACC or the Big 10 than the SEC, or Texas with the Longhorn Network and the contract with ESPN, Texas does have enough clout to be an independent. Will they do that? I don't know, but they certainly are in a position, unlike a lot of other schools in the country, to do that if they decided that was the best move.
Interesting stuff. Okay, what was the fallout as far as Major Applewhite's situation on recruiting?
On recruiting, Brian, none. I don't think it had any impact on the class of 2013. I don't think it's going to have any impact on the class of 2014. And then I said this, and I really believe it. If a kid's going to use the Major Applewhite situation as an excuse not to come to Texas, they probably weren't coming anyway, and are probably using that as an excuse not to go to Texas. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. As far as the fallout, Major Applewhite's job is safe, and I think for all intents and purposes, from what I know, talking to a lot of different people, it sounds like Major Applewhite was basically kind of a pawn in what could be turning into a really nasty, volatile political situation in Austin between the University Board of Regents, the Governor's Mansion, and University President Bill Powers. It's no secret that Bill Powers and Rick Perry don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and you throw more gasoline on the fire with the situation with Bev Kearney, the former women's track coach at Texas, who resigned amid she had an affair with a student. That came to light. She resigned. Major Applewhite was just kind of brought in as an example, I guess, to show that were there double standards going on in the athletic department and was the punishment fair. And I don't think anything else is going to happen to Major Applewhite, but it's just more gasoline on the fire between what I think is going to turn in potentially to a really nasty political situation in Austin.
What do you see as how would this impact DeLoss Dodds and Mac Brown?
I think that's putting the cart before the horse, so to say, Brian. I mean, I don't think. I think it's really early to start to gauge on what might happen. The only thing I can see is if people start digging, and if they were to dig and there are more issues at Texas that haven't come to light that have been dealt with internally that would be on par. And that's the big difference between Major Applewhite's situation and Bev Kearney's situation is when you really look at the two, they're really different in the sense that Bev Kearney had complete control over the students she had an affair with in terms of being able to control the scholarship and potentially being able to affect other people's scholarships on that track team, whereas Major Applewhite's situation was totally different.
Right.
But when you start looking at are there more things out there, and I think that's really what the Board of Regents meeting was about is there anything else we need to know about? Is everything that's out in public, is that all? And I think if there were more situations, Brian, that came to light, then I think you could potentially see there being trouble down the road for DeLoss Dodds. But I think it's very, very premature to even speculate on anything that could be going on with DeLoss Dodds' future.
But other than that, nothing going on in Austin.
Yeah, other than that, everything's fine. Baseball's getting ready to start, and basketball team's struggling. But hey, other than that, not a whole lot going on.
Well, with the basketball team going the way it's going, this is at least keeping you with something interesting to talk about right now.
Yeah, I think that's why people are down on recruiting right now, because there's nothing really positive to say about basketball. Even the baseball team, which has been the fallback for some, they didn't even make the NCAA tournament last year, so it's kind of a rebooting year for Augie Garrido, too. So it's interesting times, Brian, when you think back, to kind of 2005, 2006, 2007, when the football program won a national championship and the basketball program is in the Elite Eight, and Omaha is the expectation for the baseball program, and even women's sports. Volleyball has always been really good at Texas, and women's basketball was still really good at the time. And look at where it's at now, it's pretty easy to see why a lot of Texas fans have soured on the way things have gone on the 48.
It looks like the bleeding needs to stop pretty soon too.
Yeah, and I don't know when that's going to happen. Like I said, Brian, for Texas, not just in recruiting, but I think for Mac Brown's future, and I think he knows it, and I think the staff knows it. They need to beat Oklahoma. I think back-to-back losses to Oklahoma is bad enough, and I believe I said this the last time I was on. Back-to-back losses to Oklahoma is bad enough. Back-to-back losses where the game is already in the bag for the Sooners by halftime is completely unacceptable, and they know they need to get that turned around. And I think everything we're talking about, none of it really matters unless Texas wins that game in October. If they win it, then I think we can start talking about, okay, now things are getting turned around in the right direction. If they lose that game with the football program, then you're talking about, okay, what really is the future at the University of Texas as far as this football program as it's currently constructed.
Going to be crazy. Hey, Jeff, thanks very much for the update. It's very fascinating what's going on in Austin right now, and we appreciate you keeping us posted.
Hey, always good to talk to you, Brian. Thank you.
Good to talk to you, too. Jeff Howe from Hook'em.com, a part of the 24/7 Sports network of websites on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.